Hi there, welcome to Market Intel, the show that brings you what's happening in the actual market for SME businesses. Today we're joined by Greg Allnut. So Greg is a partner at Advisory.Works and sort of specializes in strategic advisory and leadership and works with some of Canterbury's sort of largest businesses and sort of CEOs and anyone sort of in that senior leadership position, and focuses mainly on the actual execution of strategy as opposed to just airy-fairy stuff. So thank you for coming in, Greg.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
So essentially what we want to this is a pretty casual conversation. It's just talking about what's happening in the market for SMEs, because as you know, about 97% of the market is an SME, and obviously you'll be dealing with quite a few of them. So what I was really interested to find out from you today was what's actually keeping our CEOs awake at night, and also like where do they see the opportunities?
I guess, like anyone, we have been observing that slowdown in the market over the last sort of year or so. It's evident in a whole lot of the data you can see, from truck movements to manufacturing sort of productivity and those sorts of things. And so there has been that softening. And I think what concerns people is, how do we keep going? How do we create that growth? And I think too often they're focused on the outputs, i.e. the revenue and whatever, as opposed to what are those activities that they should be focusing on that create the revenue. And I think sometimes, they get quite top line focused as opposed to getting bottom line focused, because the smartest businesses we've worked through, like, years ago in the dairy dip, we worked with a transport company and they made more money earning less because they got really clear on understanding the voice of the customer, what their customers really wanted, and then really getting focused on delivering on that. And they actually stole market share off one of the biggest players. And so, it was really good evidence of you get focused on the right things and just don't worry about the distractions, and get really focused. I guess the other thing that keeps them awake, and this is any business, is people, the people side of it. There's, your culture and trying to work with people and get the best out of them, and sometimes working with legacy difficult people. And then also, if you're growing, and the good businesses, there's still a lot of opportunity out there, even in a difficult market. If you're smart about it, there's always opportunity. Is when you grow, how you need to adapt and change the way you lead and run your business is very different from when you're 2 or 3 people to 10 people to 30 people, and you need to be able to shift and adapt and change in the way you lead that. And so I guess that's a lot of what we see. The other part, people always say, God, if it wasn't for people and customers, business would be so easy. And so it is getting out there and getting really close with your customers, keeping those relationships there, but actually understanding what they really want. And
so obviously that's a lot of sort of the main challenges to summarize that. Obviously, is you talked about the people side of things. So obviously expanding teams, but I imagine another key challenge with people would actually be recruiting the right people, because and retaining as well. And like you see it more and more with we'll use the big 4 accounting firms as an example. I think it was that EY came out and said they've taken the minimum degree standards off all their application processes, and they're sort of focusing more on people with that emotional intelligence, or they can add a bit more value to it. Like, are the smaller, in the sort of smaller to medium market, finding staff? Are they struggling, or is there still pretty good talent out there?
Depending on some markets, like in mid-Canterbury, there's a real struggle for talent because the unemployment levels are so low. But it becomes clearer and clear every time that the recruit slow and fire fast. Take that time, take a couple of times of bringing people in and seeing them, get really clear on what cultural fit looks like, so that you understand what your values are, what your purpose is, and how do they align to your cultural set, but also then the cultural add. What do they bring to you? And what's that, that X factor? Because arguably you sort of say, look, your job description is table stakes. Then what else do you bring? And understanding what it is you want from someone. And sometimes there's a little bit of gut in there as well, going, I just think this person's got a little bit of X factor. But yeah, it is difficult, but I would say slow it down, be really clear on the questions you're asking them. I remember going to an interview years ago, and it was a coffee, and they went, "We like your CV." I went, "Thanks." Go for a ride. Came back and went, "Do you want it or not?" And I went, this is sort of at the one end of their spectrum, and I'd sort of go to the other end of the spectrum and being a little bit more disciplined about it, because that's the way we like to do it. And then even maybe for key roles is doing behavioural profiling to see how they will behave within the business. Not IQ, but how do people interact? How are they going to be? The different personalities and what they bring to the business, and are they the right fit for that role?
Because I guess there's nothing worse than having a bad egg in the bunch. If you've got a client not a client, well, sometimes that's hard work too. But if you've got a staff member that goes a bit sour and that can obviously spread.
The one rotten potato can ruin the sack, sort of analogy. And you'll spend 80% of your time working on those 20% of people who are maybe not performing, when we should be spending that 80% of the time on the great people and being able to, stretch them, develop them and take them further and give them opportunities. And, that's what we'd really want to be doing. And I think that comes down to that question we had earlier or discussing before around execution, being quite disciplined in the things we are going to focus on and not focus on, and being able to, work on the things that are going to make the most impact in your business. I think, one of the things we ask is, how have I been? What impact did I make last year? And how could I have been more impactful? And if you understand that, you deep think about that, you start to really analyse how you can make a difference.
And so what are the business, what's the big picture for a lot of these companies in Christchurch? What do they think is the next move? We've obviously just talked about that before with the entrepreneurial risk and stuff, but I guess you always have to keep thinking about moving forward and such, and pouncing on those opportunities in the market. Like, are you having any conversations in regards to executing on that kind of stuff?
Oh, for sure. And the businesses that we've been working with for a long time, a lot of them in the construction sector, we predicted when the taper off and the rebuild was happening. Some of them then did a strategic execution into Wellington, acquisition into Wellington, and then grew organically into Auckland, or others have pivoted and gone into other areas or gone upstream or downstream and have been very deliberate. Working with a number who are now developing their export strategy to get really more focused on that, say like going into the US and where in the US or into different countries. And then others are even pivoting just to be in a slightly different space to position a unique product or market that is different to the rest of it. So I can't sort of talk in too many detailed terms because a lot of them are just in the early stages of doing some of those things and got first mover advantage. But this again comes back to forecasting the future, being able to predict what you think needs to happen, and then making those deliberate moves to be able to shift and change and adapt. If you've been sitting here and going, oh hell, the rebuild's tapered off, and manufacturing appears to be a little bit slow, and it's like, you're behind the eight ball, and you're reacting to the market as you should be able to predict all those sorts of things. So the best businesses are always looking forward and going, what if, how could we, and starting to think about that.
Having a bit of a plan.
And having a plan and executing that plan. It's just, you've got to pick a play and you've got to run with it and see if it works. And if it doesn't, switch and change again. And if it works, add more to it. And it's just, this thing of picking a goal and religiously sticking to it and going isn't true anymore. We pick a general direction and we start implementing like hell, and try some shit, and we pick a plan and go with it. And if it don't work, we iterate and change and go again, and it's just keep going. That's the best advice we can give anyone, and that's what we see the best businesses doing.
Well, you just answered the last question for me, which was what was your one piece of advice. So no, that's perfect. You answered that easily. So no, it's good. Awesome. Thank you for coming in. It's been good. It's actually really interesting listening because like we were talking, like the sort of industries you were talking about that have had a wee bit of a downturn, and sort of that people are obviously looking to the future and very optimistic. But there's still a little bit of caution there, and they're thinking a lot more about it, which is good. And that's sort of similar to the conversation we had last week as well. So there's definitely a trend happening there in the market.
And that piece around, even now with the coronavirus hitting and the impact that's had on businesses who are either getting their supply from China, trying to export to China, part of the tourism industry, they've all been impacted by that. Now, depending on how long that goes on, will determine how much economic impact that's going to have, but how long it even takes to ramp back up again. So this is responding to the short term, but we need to respond with the medium term in mind. And so it's have a plan to get through the short term with the medium term in mind, and being able to come out of that in the best sort of shape. But if people are getting into that, have a plan, cut to the plan with the long term in mind, know where your money's going, focus on the bottom line, get out, network like a demon, bloody don't cut on your marketing, and get out there and bloody lead, because your people want a little bit of a surety, and they want to know that we've got a future, and that's what it's all about.
Let's not forget it's an election year too, so things slow down in the last few years. The next 4 months really is what it's all about.
That's awesome. Bloody good. Thanks for coming in, Greg.
Thank you.
Awesome. Cheers, mate.